This is an interview with Frank Battisti on August 24th, 2022. It is being conducted by Charles Peltz at the New England Conservatory. Frank Battisti is at his home in Leverett, Massachusetts. And we are doing this on behalf of the College Band Directors National Association Archives. Good morning, Frank, or good afternoon. It's good to see you. And we're going to leap right into questions at this point. I've sent you the CBDNA preferred questions, and we will use those to begin with and see how much time we have left at the end for maybe your own comments or other questions that I also sent to you. So let's begin with the first one. Talk about a little bit about your background and what led to your involvement in CBDNA.
Well, I was born in Ithaca, New York, spent the first 37 years of my life there, graduated from Ithaca High School, graduated from Ithaca College, went right back to Ithaca High School, first as the teacher of instruments, but not the band director. And then after 2 years, I became the band director in 1955 and remained the band director until 1967. When I took the job at Baldwin Wallace College in Bree, Ohio, and that led me to join CBDNA. I mean, until that time, I was aware of CBDNA, but not involved, and really not. It did not occupy much space in my mind.
What brought you to CBDNA? Was there a person, or was there an event that brought you into the fold? And
Yeah,
what
I became a college band director, and I decided I would go to their conference, in which I would be able to meet a lot of people, and so that's what I did, and that was my initial contact and my first awareness of what transpired. What were the things they were pursuing? What were the things that seemed important on their agenda, which gave me some bearings relative to what I thought the organization offered to a young college band director.
Sure. When this would have been in 1967 or 68?
It probably about 68. Yeah,
And
probably 68.
Was this a national conference or a regional conference?
This was a regional conference, and
Mhm.
it was in University of Pennsylvania, University of. That was my first one. It was in December. It was in an incredible snowstorm, and the principal guest there was William D. Ravelli. That's when I really developed my beginning to develop my relationship with William D.
Had he brought the Michigan band to Ithaca High School when you were band director?
Yes, he did.
All right.
Yes, we had the band there. I don't remember what year it was, but they were on tour and they played a concert at Ithaca High School. Yes.
So who else were the people who were important in CBDNA in 1968?
Karl Kolvik was the president once for 2 years, and because I remember that because he tried to put together for the bicentennial of the United States, he wanted to put together an all-star band made up of students from college bands, and spent a great deal of time and money trying to do it, and was not successful. In fact, it bankrupt it bankrupt CBDNA. But he was the president. It seems like David Whitwell was like one of the vice presidents, whatever you want to call him, because he succeeded Karl. And it was David's job to kind of resurrect the CBDNA as a viable organization, in the sense of we were bankrupt and kind of wandering around trying to figure out who we were, what we should do, what should be the agenda, because all the effort was directed towards trying to make and create this bicentennial band.
Right. David was, certainly of your generation, and has won the Lifetime Achievement Award, quite deservedly so, and is probably the preeminent scholar of wind band music and history. That made him, was he a different kind of person to be president of CBDNA up until that point? Had most of the presidents been sort of Big Ten or large university directors or not? I mean, was he a different profile?
Well, yes, he was. Even though he was a graduate of the University of Michigan, played in Ravelli's band.
Right.
But David was a very, very different kind of college band director.
Right.
And so there was a complete pivot in the sense of the objectives and agenda for CBDNA when David became president.
Did that pivot excite you? I mean, did you get a sense that you were at a nexus point for the organization, or were you not even aware, you were just there and you saw things happening and you didn't make any kind of judgment about what was happening?
Well, after my initial contacts back in 1968-69 with CBDNA, I decided there had to be another organization because they weren't everything. Too much time spent on how you run an organization. Too many things spent on the non-musical activities. And so that's when I decided to start the National Wind Ensemble Conference. It was a counter organization. So, the people who were excited by the possibility of a kind of organization that Fred Fennell had started in 1952 with Wind Ensemble, I decided I'm going to hold a Wind Ensemble Conference, and it's not going to be a capital letter organization, and it's not going to have any presidents, and it's not going to have any committees. It's just going to be a gathering of people who share a certain kind of philosophy, and we are going to have composers and publishers, and we're going to get together and we're going to talk about the literature.
Right.
So that continued for about, I think, 6 years as a kind of counter to the CBDNA agenda, which was not focused on trying to expand, improve the literature that was being played by university bands.
Sure. Did so you ran these concomitantly, and who else hosted this? You hosted one in Boston, the first one.
I hosted two, and I hosted the first two in Boston, and then the third one was hosted by Bob at University of Wisconsin. And then Bob Gray at University of Illinois hosted one. I think David Whitwell hosted one. Possibly Keith Bryan at Yale hosted one. There were about 6 or 7 of them.
Now, were you still, however, did you continue your membership in CBDNA while you did this?
Yes,
so
I continued my membership.
Right.
I continued my membership.
You
and
did.
So
Yeah.
so that when I was elected to the, I don't know what president-elect, or the third guy on the tier of leadership, and could begin to influence what the objectives were. By the time that I became president in 1979-81, the Wind Ensemble Conference did stop functioning, because in fact what we had done was we had infiltrated CBDNA, and CBDNA really became an extension of the Wind Ensemble Conference.
What was the reaction? I mean, obviously, you were bringing these new ideas, and there were people who embraced old ideas. How did that work? I mean, what was it like to be in an organization of a couple of thousand people and not everyone being on the same page?
There was a lot of conflict. I mean, there were people who thought the wind ensemble was destroying the band, and that, oh, you know, the wind ensemble is just a concert band in tuxedos and, and instead of band uniforms. So, I mean, it was very contentious. You know, there were two camps. There was no question about it, two camps. And, you know, we managed to talk to each other, and we managed to find issues that we could agree on. And gradually, the focus in the CBDNA agenda became completely focused on the music making, and the involvement of the band in artistic endeavors.
Mm-hmm. And in relationship to that, there are obviously two other large band organizations, NBA and ABA. Were they, did many of the CBDNA members who were wedded more to the older ideas, the traditional ideas, did they fall away and just go to those two other organizations? Or do you think that there were a significant number of people who found common ground in the organizations between the two camps?
I think the latter statement, your latter statement. I think that the idea of a umbrella college association was presented a structure in which the greatest potential for college band existed.
Right.
So I don't think, I mean, we didn't lose membership, we gained membership.
Right. So what was it like for people like Harry Begian, William D. Ravelli, John Painter? I mean, these were men at the end or in the strong middle of their careers. They had grown up with the band and they had made extraordinary musical product with their bands. What was the conversation like with someone like Harry Begian or with William D. when you're now talking about 13 people on the stage as well in the same evening, as well as 70 people on the stage? I mean, what was the interaction like?
Those men retained their allegiance to the concert, symphony, band, whatever you want to call it. But because CBDNA now and this membership, at least certain leaders in the membership, were focusing on the development of literature written by really excellent composers. William D. Ravelli played Karel Husa.
Right.
So that where they did not embody the wind ensemble, they did play the great literature that was being written. So that there was a developing appreciation for not what you called your group, but what you played. And all of the, William D., Harry Begian, they were excellent musicians.
Yeah.
So that what you got was a very good performance of this new literature. And so they didn't really have to embrace a new organization. They just had to play the literature that was being written and being written by really among the world's best composers.
Right.
So that the literature, again, the shared literature is what created the cohesiveness.
Right.
And that will always be the case.
All right. Very good. So you went from being a person within the organization, then you became president of the organization in what year?
79, 81.
79, 81.
Yep.
And when you were there, what would you consider to be, you had a vision of what you wanted to do. And I'm sure, as most presidents do, what was your vision going into your term?
I had, the one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to continue to try to improve the literature by commissioning the best composers in the world. That was, in other words, the development of repertoire was a major issue. Also, I wanted to change the committee structure of CBDNA. So instead of forming committees in which there would be representatives from each division, I assigned a chairman to each committee and told them they could appoint whoever they wanted. If it could be all in the same division, I don't care. All I want is at the next conference, I want a good report on the work that you're doing. So there were no committees. There was a chairman, and they could do what they wanted to do to create something and bring it back as a report to the organization.
This wasn't, again, anyone reviewing this might know that many of the questions I'm asking now are not prescribed. These are just, I'm taking them from what Frank says in a previous statement. So let's give, if you can remember, can you think about a chairperson? You don't have to remember their name, but what task you had assigned them to and what they produced for you, other than something that, if there was something other than literature, which we've covered, if there was something else, what did they bring back to you? What were the kind of things that were important to people other than literature at the time?
Well, I can remember two. One was Keith Bryan.
And
obviously Keith Bryan was on history, right? How the old bands played, right? And he brought back a good report on all those professional bands. I assigned John Painter to come up with a guide for when a high school band director invites a college band director to guest conduct. What should be invited? What should be included in this invitation, and what should be covered, and what by vice versa, what the clinician or guest conductor ought to do. And John, this was great because John wrote an A and B version of it, and one of them was hilarious. But that was what I did. I basically just gave it to someone, said, look, you form your committee, do whatever you want, but I want a report.
Got it. Very good. So what would you consider, what would be then, you had an agenda and it was literature based, understandably.
Charlie, I want to add one more thing.
Yes.
I was a firm believer that if the wind band were to make progress as a viable universal musical entity, that it had to be international. So I wanted to find a form. I wanted CBDNA to provide the seed money to form an international wind band organization for composers, conductors, and publishers. That was another important thing I wanted to do.
Right. So you were thinking of WASB when you, in 1979, when you started CBDNA.
Yeah.
It
It took me the 2 years to do it because we had the first conference for that became WASB. It wasn't, the conference was just an international conference for those, for conductors, composers, and publishers that was held in 1981. That's where WASB was formed.
Right. So what would you, so you would say that, would you say then that WASB was a product of your presidency, or I shouldn't say WASB, but the international element was secured during your time as president? That would be an accomplishment.
There's no question about that.
Right. And what would you say in terms of developing the literature? What were some of the concrete products of your time as president that made you feel that you had accomplished some of your agenda?
At the conference in 1981 at University of Michigan,
right,
there was a new work by William Kraft, there was a new work by Ernst Krenek. In other words, there were four major Gunther's Symphony.
Right. Yeah.
So that there was a major performances. I think it was one of the great CBDNA conferences.
Right. And Gunther gave the keynote. And
That's
there's
right.
for that, which I
that's
would
right.
encourage, if CBDNA has the ability, or if it's not up on the website, it should be attached to whatever this interview is, and probably Bob Reynolds will have mentioned it in his interview as well. So, Frank, did you feel after you left? As I recall, you made an agreement, or you worked with some of your colleagues to ensure a pattern of succession for the larger agenda. Is that not true? Wasn't Bob your president-elect, and maybe Don was the vice president? I mean,
No,
the three
no,
of
the
you.
next president that followed me, Bob Foster, was either before me or after me.
And that would be from the University of Kansas, right?
No, this was Bill Foster,
Oh,
Florida A&M.
okay.
I can't remember whether it was before or I think it was before. So the lineup, there was someone between me and Bob and Don. Seemed
Uh-huh.
like there was someone in there, but I can't remember who. But anyway,
I can tell you. Wait, just give me a minute. I've quick gotten it here, and it was you, then Bill Foster,
now there's
then Bob, then
Yeah.
Don.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. So Bill was very good in the sense that where he was not involved in the things that we were involved in, he was his band in Florida A&M was everyone knew, especially because of the football band. And so, but he was very good. He came to the first international conference. He supported it. He basically, there was nothing new, but it retained a certain vibrancy, so that when Bob took over, it was still the vital thing.
Mhm.
And then Don and Don, I think, is the one who instituted the journal. The journal is no longer published, but it was a journal, and I think that's Don's contribution to it. I can't remember what Bob, because we decided that every president after me should have a special project that they want to
Right.
accomplish.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was with Bob. Don's was the journal, for sure.
It might come to you. And of course, Bob's interview will be in this sequence.
Yeah,
as
right,
well, so
yeah,
he'll be able to talk about it. So Frank, let's talk about legacies for you, and actually, in a sense, for all three of the three, and we include Fred Fennell in that group of the people who were instrumental in shifting, Dave Whitwell, shifting the wind ensemble world. Let's talk about how things have played forward. If you were to look back now in the post-80s world, how do you feel the organization has either retained elements of that legacy that you gentlemen produced? How has it shifted? There are three parts of this. What elements have been retained that you thought were retained well, curated? What has been shifted? And where have you felt the organization has not fulfilled its promise as it maybe could or should?
I want to add one
Sure.
one thing I think I accomplished. I forgot. I maybe the most important individual to be brought in to the CBDNA orbit was Richard Floyd, who I appointed as the secretary treasurer of the organization. Until I took over, Charlie, there was never a budget for the organization. It was all ad-libbed. And so, I mean, I presented the first CBDNA budget for the year in 1979. And Dick, just his contribution to the organization over whatever, 20 or 25 years has been enormous.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to add that as one of the best things I did was to appoint Dick Floyd.
Right.
secretary treasurer.
So
So-
I'll ask you the three questions now in separate form. Let's start with the positive. What part of your legacy and the legacy of your compatriots who were all in that era, what do you think are some of the best things that have been retained by CBDNA, and therefore you feel like your ideas have been perennials?
Well, obviously, the starting of the commissioning works has been retained.
Mhm.
However, they are not tapping the best composers in the world, the most renowned. If one looks at what the pieces that were added in the 1980s, I mean, they were Pulitzer Prize winning, they were Gravmar winners. These were up at the top of the world. And most important, in most cases, it was the first piece that they had written. So they brought new things to the repertoire. Now we have commissioning is no longer special. Everybody commissions. In fact, there's too much commissioning. We commission now like we go to a tailor to have a suit made. It's got to fit. It's got to fit the person who's commissioning it. In the early years, we commissioned a great composer and we had no idea what we were going to get, because we weren't trying to get a piece that was tailored to the band. We were trying to get something that would expand, improve, whatever you want to call it. We had no idea. I mean, nobody knew what Corral Husa was going to write when they commissioned him. With the composers who are writing band pieces now, we know what it's going to be, because we now have, again, band composers. These men were not band composers. They were composers. Now we have a lot of pieces being written by the same composers. And so there's not enough freshness and new ideas coming into the repertoire. It's very predictable.
Mm-hmm.
I think there should be an emphasis on getting someone who has never written a band piece to write a band piece, because they'll bring something of themselves to it. And it might not always work, but that's how you get the energy that you need in order to expand the damn thing.
Right.
You know, you might like hamburgers, but if you keep ordering hamburgers, you're only going to get hamburgers.
Mm. So what would be something that you've put both sides of that commissioning legacy in the interview, the good and the maybe not so good. What do you think the organization, you've already talked about literature. What do you think the organization should be thinking about as it heads into the next generation? If you were to be given the presidency again, or earn it, as they say, other than a literature issue, what do you think college band directors should be thinking about?
They would be thinking about, how can we make what we do, the music we play, more relevant to our society? Charlie, if you examine CBDNA programs, I don't know how far back you'd have to go to find anything that deals with programming. We deal with repertoire and literature, but we don't deal with programming. And programming is the way you get the audiences to hear your music. This is how you advance it. There has been no, to my knowledge, no significant effort in talking about the ability to present programs that will attract audiences. Now, I'm not saying we should play entertainment music, but I'm saying that a piece with Schuller, Corral Husa, Joe Schwantner on a program at Jordan Hall on a snowy January night won't attract an audience like a program that might include Schuller, Leonard Bernstein, and George Gershwin. These are names that these people know. They like their music. They will come to it. We have to create programs that will attract people so that they can begin to know our literature. And so we should put great emphasis on development of programming. I mean, Gunther told me, I said, he told me once that what he liked about, it was one of the conductors of the Cincinnati, not the most well-known one. I can't remember now, but he told me, he says, he put together the greatest programs. And so, you know, we like pieces. We think they're great, so we just pile them on. We're playing for each other. If we want to expand that audience, if we want to make it relevant to those people out there, then we've got to think about programming.
Frank, in today's world, it's interesting you use the word relevance. To many in today's world, that really becomes a rather narrow view. The word relevance means social justice, means social issues, that music should address those. If someone were to say, you're right, Frank, we need to be using relevant music, which means it has to appeal and be attractive to a particular group, identity group within the culture, that it needs to deal with an environmental focus. Do you feel that that is how do you feel about that definition of relevance? You've made a different kind of one. What do you think about that one?
In your question, answer your question, great music does something to the human spirit. In it, you can discover things that are relevant no matter how you want to look at it. I mean, if we just take making of it, the people who make the music, the kids that play in our organizations, what do they discover? They discover what unity is. They discover that in the musical experience, all the differences disappear. The feeling of unity, the feeling of how important and how sharing we are, at this moment, that this is glorious. That should be a model for how we live, how the government works, etc. We have to participate in something that's bigger than ourselves and discover in it what unity really is and how fantastic that makes the human spirit feel. I don't have to play. It isn't the style of music. It isn't the kind of music. It's whatever style it is. It has to be meaningful music in which people can either feel in participating in it or in listening to it, that makes them aware of what sharing unity is. That's what makes it relevant. Because when I'm making music, if I'm making great, meaningful music, while I'm involved in it, all the differences between me and the other people making it disappear.
Right.
We share something.
Right.
The minute it stops, it all comes back.
Yeah. You're quoted in a book as talking about music and as being emblematic, or the ensemble, the large ensemble, is being emblematic of democracy. And that has been, that quote, your quote about that has been used to defend the idea that democracy is shared decision-making. And I, having been someone who was been a part of your life for now almost 40 years, I do not think that you do much shared decision-making in the rehearsal room, because your decisions that you make are your responsibility as the leader. So would you say that when you talk about democracy in music, it's more about what you just said, which is it's about sharing and the equality of contribution, as opposed to the issue of decision-making or dictating what happens in the process by everyone? Or do you have another way of looking at democracy in music and your own quote about it?
No, one of the nicest letters I ever received was one from Michael Colgrass, who told me, he says, Frank, I don't know how you do it, because when I watch you conduct, it's very conservative. You're not doing anything. And they play beautifully. What the hell are you doing? I said, Michael, it's the way I rehearse. And you know what I do? I do a lot of sectional rehearsals. And you know what you can do in sectional rehearsals? You can make contribution. You can talk about it. You can share. That's where you do it. You don't do it with everybody. You do it in sectional rehearsals where there's input from the players, where you can discuss. That's democracy. It's like small town hall meetings. Then you all get together. You don't try to do it when everybody's together. You do it in small meetings, more intimate. I don't have any problem with that. By the time I get to the rehearsal or the concert, I don't have to do a hell of a lot. Everybody's making a contribution because everybody has contributed.
So I have another question that goes back to something when we were talking about literature, and I think this is something that's been discussed before, but I want to make sure that you're on record with this. You have often said that one of the things that you enjoyed about the 1950s and 60s when you were a high school band director was that the better music that you could play was also the better music that Fred Fennell was playing an hour and a half away in Rochester. And that a decently prepared and talented high school band could play the same thing that the Eastman Wind Ensemble could play, and play it reasonably well. With the initiatives that you were responsible for, you and your group at your time, the Pulitzer Prize winning composers were no longer going to write music that was playable by most high school bands. So there began to be, without question, a divergence. There was a repertoire that could be done by the college ensemble, and not even all the college ensembles, but some of them. And then there was music that went to the high school band that they could play technically. Was that an inevitable thing to have happen? Was it inevitable that split happened? And how do you feel about that split? Does that provide you any regret by what you did?
Well, the college band director is supposed to be the leader, supposed to be the model, supposed to be interested in nurturing those below them, right? What would have happened if instead of spending $50,000 for a piece for the University of Texas, we decided to spend $50,000 in commissioning pieces for high school bands? That's leadership. That's leading by modeling. And that exposes who we're interested in. Where you spend your money is where your heart lies, right? So we're spending our money to raise us. And we say we're interested in the schools, but in fact, I question whether how interested we are.
Right. So
because we're not participating with them. We're not helping them. And most of all, we're not educating them in a way where they can appreciate what music does, not using music for another purpose. I mean, social justice is important, but so is art. So do we create art teachers or do we create social justice teachers? Yeah. Well, I think we create art, and art can be used to bring about more justice in the world. So, I mean, we have to do something about, CBDNA doesn't belong to MENC. Now, MENC, I've got a lot of questions about MENC, but how are you going to shape it if you don't even want to participate in it? Yeah. So, we talk out of two sides of the mouth. Mm-hmm. We have to lead by leadership. We have to show them, I suggested, I don't know what year it was, but I made a suggestion that CBDNA commissioned $10,000 to commission a piece for high school bands. CBDNA do it. It was approved, but then never done. because we have to participate with them if we want to keep them, or we want to try to create something in which we don't go in two different directions. Because the literature split is only indicative of the bigger split.
Yeah, but do you think there's a chicken and egg issue there? It's hard to say where the split really begins, because you have literature which becomes more separated, which then separates the communities, and it's difficult to find out at which juncture you have the problem. But you have often said that in the 50s and 60s, you didn't have the split because the music was in fact communal.
That's right. That's
And,
right. And that was because we had people like Fred Fennell, Walt Beeler, William D. Ravelli, who really were interested in the public schools.
Right. Let me ask a question, therefore, because you might know the answer to this because you were close to the birth of it. Was the Persichetti Symphony commissioned, when they would commission a piece by Persichetti, would the Ingolfdahl Sinfonietta, I mean, these are pieces that could be played by high school bands. Did the commissioners of those pieces say to Vince Persichetti, look, remember, we want this to be played by everyone? Did Theodore Presser say to Vince Persichetti, by the way, don't make it too hard because we want to sell a lot of copies to high school band directors as well, as we know happened with the Schoenberg theme and variations, publisher Presser? Was that part of the way the commissions were brokered in those days? That you said to a composer, you can write in your own style, but you got to make sure that it can be played by everyone from age 15 to 25, not 18 to 25.
No, I don't think so. I think, Corel wrote a high school band piece because it was commissioned by the Walt Beeler commissioning thing. I don't think I think they can write, like say Stravinsky could write pieces for elementary piano player,
Right.
and for the New York Philharmonic.
Right.
We want to expose the students to different creative minds and different creative pieces. They don't have to be the same pieces.
Right. I understand. I'm actually asking a historical question. The philosophy is gold plated, and thank you for it. But the historical question is this: at the time of a piece like the Persichetti Symphony for Band or Divertimento, was when Persichetti was approached, was it part of the thinking that he should be writing something that could be playable by everyone from age 15 through 25, as opposed to, it wasn't. It was just, he wrote what he wrote for, and we all just were blessed with the fact that he didn't write a piece that was too hard.
That's right.
Okay.
But Persichetti, he wrote the symphony. He was commissioned to write a piece for like a 14-piece band. It got out of hand. And all of a sudden he realized that the strings were never going to come in. So, and you see, look what he asked the percussion players to do.
Oh, right. No, there's no question. But
yeah.
It's true. But if you think about that in those percussion parts, the issues are not technical ones. They're counting ones.
That's right. And they're also multiple. You got to use multiple drums. You have to move around back there.
And there's no question that was a landmark piece in that. But in an interesting way, it was a landmark piece because it asked the individual player not to be terribly talented. It just asked the player to think differently about sounds and their place.
That's right. But Charlie, he also began to expose the color in the orchestration, because there's very few pages in Persichetti where everything up and down covered. And so, a piece like Pageant, is very playable by any high school band, and it still retains what Persichetti music is. That's the beauty. He didn't write a piece that was easy, that is really not Persichetti.
Right.
And so Colegrass has talked about this a lot, that he thinks that, he said every single graduate school that trains composers ought to make them write pieces for small, but by lower level players, because it's the hardest thing in the world to be creative, to be, imaginative, and still come up with a piece of art that represents what you do.
Well, there is a phenomenon, you know it as well as anyone would know it, that in the British tradition, whether it be Holst or Tippett or Peter Maxwell Davies, almost all of them at some point taught children.
Yes.
And not even high school bands, but children.
Yep.
And therein lies part of the experience that you're talking about, where a composer deals with the most rudimentary of musical skill. So I have a final question to sort of ask, and it has a little bit to do with legacies, but and I'm going to make a historical analogy, which you will be particularly attuned to. So if we are to say that because of the changes that you produced, you and Bob Reynolds and David Whitwell and Don Huntsberger and Fred Fennell and some others that I just haven't mentioned, and people can shout them at their screen at this point. If you are, in essence, the Washington Adams and Jefferson of your generation, who really did a revolution, just changed the way things were thought, then there's another generation in American statesmanship, the Daniel Websters and the Henry Clays, who are not nearly as famous because they had the unenviable task of inheriting this revolutionary product. And they found it difficult to know what to do with it. Have you felt that the subsequent generations to you have been able to appropriately take that which you created and move it in directions that have been fruitful? And have the Henry Clays and the Daniel Websters done their job? And if not, or if not as much, what do you think it could be done? You've already mentioned some specific things, so maybe this is a redundant question.
No, I think this is very, very important question. It's time that CBDNA review their objectives, because what CBDNA does today is really not much different than what they were doing in 1990, in the sense that the conferences are the same kind of format. The world has changed a hell of a lot since that time. So I think it's time that there be discussion about what is the role of college bands, what should be the objectives of college bands, how do we create structures that allow young band directors a greater voice in the work of the organization. I was lucky. I became an officer after only being in the organization 5 or 6 years. There are many young people come in who never get a chance to say anything. And they become disillusioned, or they just don't care. I don't blame them, because I don't have a voice. So that the leaders have to realize that they must prepare and operate in a way that encourages and gives younger people an opportunity to participate at a greater level. At the same time, they need to find ways of which those who have led can have a say, but not in the sense of calling the shots, not losing the wisdom that comes with experience. So trying to create a structure in which you're allowing the young to participate early on, at the same time retaining the wisdom of the older experienced person, deciding what the role of the college band is now in our society, deciding on how you translate that into objectives. This is, I think, what CBDNA has to do, because right now they basically are still structured and operating in a past generation structure. We need some good, honest to God discussion about where we're going, where we want to go, how we want to get there, how the membership can participate. Because right now, I don't know what the objective of CBDNA are. It sounds like just continue to commission pieces. That's about it. I don't know what else, and put on concerts for each other.
Frank, you know that we are those in higher education who actually do bring their head out of the sand, which is a lot of our members in CBDNA are aware of the larger world, are faced with a couple of problems that are much bigger than the band. And they are well, there are a number of them. One of them is the simple demographic shift that we're about to incur in the next 2 or 3 years, in which there's going to be a dramatic reduction in the number of students at school in colleges. So there's going to be a demographic population problem. And then the decline in music education programs and the difference in focus in music education programs away from large ensembles. So the question is, should CBDNA, as part of what it does, think larger than what is the role of the college band, but rather what is the role of music and what is the role of music education? Because inextricably, the band has been related to music education departments. And as that severs, and as the population in general declines, you have a much different focus. So to what degree do you think CBDNA should be focusing or thinking about these larger meta issues?
Oh, I think they should be focusing on unbelievable. I mean, music education is the key to everything. And so you put your head in the sand if you're not thinking about what's going on at the music education. I mean, we need to change the whole way we prepare teachers. I mean, you know, there are places that are doing incredible work. That's because they have great teachers. And there are places where they're doing terrible work because they're bad teachers. There's no such thing as a kind of a good teacher. It's like being pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. And you're either a good teacher or you're a bad teacher. And we have to get rid of all the bad ones. And we can't afford to graduate any more bad teachers, because we're going down the drain with bad teachers.
Well, Frank, this has been a tremendously, is there anything else you'd like to add? We're at the end of an hour. We're not following the clock. This is not a union job, but you've said an awful lot. I think we've covered the things that are important. And the sequence of this interview may be changed to end on a different kind of note, or it may be stayed exactly as it is. Is there anything else you'd like to offer as we conclude our time together?
Your last question is very important. We can't not be interested in music education. And the one thing that the older generation did do is they were very much involved in music education. Now at the schools, the really excellent schools of music education is often relegated to a second level position. And so many of the excellent teachers, so many of the excellent music makers our music education don't even touch. I mean, they should be inspired by the greatness of these teachers, the way that their energy and their enthusiasm, their imaginations, that's essential. Every single one of music education student should be so inspired by the 4 or 5 years of education they get because they've had great teachers. That's it. That's absolutely essential. They can't be given second-rate graduate students and expect to come out to be first-rate musician teachers.
I think that's a great way to end. Maybe that will therefore now require no editing because it ends on an inspirational and positive note. On behalf of CBDNA, Frank, we thank you for a lifetime of service, and we thank you for the hour that you've given us as part of the history of the organization. And we have been blessed by your presence and your inspiration and all that you did, especially in that very fertile time and revolutionary period in the 1960s and 70s. So thank you very much. We wish you only and all the best to you and Charlotte. And we thank you, and we say to you now, goodbye.
Goodbye, Charlie. Thank you.